Hello?
Can you hear me now, George?
Yeah, you're loud and clear. Can you hear?
Well, good.
So are we in the chat room, or is this just home to home?
Well, I don't know where you're at. I'm in an office building that is sort of my home, but I have a home 2 miles north of my office building.
I've listened into your chat room conversations, and you're a global icon.
Okay, you better go loose. Something on your microphone's a little loose because we're getting some static, but it's not something that'll cause us to quit.
It's too loud or it's too indistinct?
No, it's good.
Okay, good. So,
why don't you introduce yourself to the American market? Although people around the world are aware of you, I had a very favorable comment on you from a guy down in New Zealand. And I also solicited comments on our own radio show yesterday, and the comments I got were all favorable.
yeah, I talk a lot to your people, like there's Lady Fairfax, and they're really, really sensible and well-informed people. And it's really uplifting to see that the true nature of our world is being discussed by anybody, because the false news is really, really vicious now. So I'm a professor in neuroscience, and I've worked at Imperial College London, the University of Sunderland, and eventually in Otago University in Dunedin, New Zealand. And everywhere I've gone, the funding for decent activities in society is disappearing. When I came back from New Zealand in 2010, I decided to take some time out and stop being a neuroscientist and trying to invent new drugs for epilepsy and pain. And I dedicated a few months to looking at the global economy. And when you look at what happened in your reset and our banking crash of 2008, it is just vicious, totally premeditated. And several researchers in England, along with me, have now, we were able to defame almost every cabinet member in the government in several regimes now. And everything that we report, we have the director numbers for the culprits, and it takes you into massive war crimes, and none of the people in Britain will listen to our profiling of those issues. Yeah, and I think that most of our information comes from the official business registers in Britain, and I've been very frustrated that I cannot find the equivalent of that in America. Your regimes operate under much more secretive conditions in the business world. Would you agree with that?
Yes, that's not a forte of mine. In fact, I don't know. You probably have a bunch of your listeners that don't listen to Able Danger, but if there's any of your people that are not familiar with me, I'm one half of Able Danger, at least radio-wise. We don't know how many people we have supporting us, but it would be measured in thousands or tens of thousands. However, yes, I agree that if what you tell me is correct, that you guys can track down these numbers. I would suggest that the reason that may not be done or possible in the United States of America is because the United States of America is a wholly owned colony of either the crown agents or the monarchy or the central bankers. And would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. I've followed I forget the name of the man who wrote about all the land grabs in the name of the crown, but the whole of Africa is in British hands. and all of the stuff, the Empire State concept, it's simple to see that. And I was a Skypey friend of Greg Hallett, who also exposed the massive issues of the illegitimacy of the British monarchy for 163 years now. And I've taken that a little bit further on, because I now understand, that Queen Victoria's babies were all sired by the Rothschilds except for two, and the first one was sired on a place called the Isle of Wight, just off the south coast of England, when Queen Victoria was 12, and her husband, who was introduced into her life because she did not have enough royal marks, was blind Prince George of Cumbria. And I've recognised lately that he's a Hanoverian, but he's blind Prince George of Cumbria and Teviotdale, which is only 40 miles from my home. And so that's the man who sired the Queen Victoria's only legitimate child. All of the rest were sired by two members of the Rothschild family who run all wars, all sides, entirely for profit. And I'm sure you understand that bit.
Yes, absolutely. And did I hear you correctly that she was forced to conceive a child when she was 12?
Yeah, it was legal to be married in those days. Yeah, at age 12. And the accounts of when she had that child vary a little bit. So she may have been 14 too, but blind Prince George of Cumbria was a Hanoverian prince. And the tragedy is that all of the people that are in that German bloodline, right up to World War II, are able to participate and live in London when they are in the other side of the great conflicts. That's true in the Crimean and in the World War I, and all of the issues of the Gallipoli massacres. You know, the Germans are sitting on British cruise ships offshore watching the bombardment and there's only a few Turks onshore protecting Gallipoli, and the German bosses are very few in numbers, and it's a human tragedy. The major cause of death in Gallipoli was dysentery, and Winston Churchill was thrown out of the War Office because it was totally premeditated. And I think, did I mention to you that the London Olympics joke that has sparked so much controversy across the world since I revealed it is that the man who opened the London Olympics is a British comedian called Rowan Atkinson, and what he was doing on that evening was playing the Chariots of Fire song on an organ in front of that massive global audience. And the joke that Rowan Atkinson plays a character called Mr. Bean in British comedies, and Mr. Bean, sadly and sickly, was the war correspondent for Gallipoli. And when I revealed that, Quentin Bryce, the Governor General in Australia, who shared that joke with the whole world, thinking that the whole of the global populace is too dim-witted to see it, yeah, she resigned within 6 weeks. So do you see the magnitude of that? It's genocide for profit, and that in that case it was taking over of all of the oil wealth on the Russian steppes, run by the Rothschilds and the Balfours, and all of it is a human tragedy. And the genocide that accompanied that was the I forget what
year was the genocide roughly?
It was the Gallipoli conflict was part of World War I, but the Crimea cull was a very similar thing, you know, a significant number of decades before, and that was, you know, they took the troops there. So the combatants were France and Britain against the Russians, and the British troops were taken there in ships, and the ships were sunk in the harbour, knowing that none of the British troops would go home. And in all the great conflicts, it's the gods that ends it, and that's that's the joke. Have you heard of a headgear called a balaclava?
I've heard the word. I'm not familiar with
so
it.
It's like only your face shows through the front of it. It covers the whole of your head and your neck, and that was invented in the Crimean conflict to protect the dying troops from the vicious, harsh winter that they got there. And so, you know, the whole of the warmongering history is tragic, but now the tragedy is that the money laundering, instead of it just being issues like the Nazi loot, it occurs in peacetime on a minute to second time scale, and we've been revealing the methodology that they use to launder the money. In Britain, if you can get the cash offshore in amounts less than £1 million at a time, it's totally immune from financial regulation. And you know, several bosses that are You were not as aware of the central banking issues when I briefly discussed it with you last night as some of the other analysts in America. Have you heard of Dean Henderson?
No, I have not.
Well, sadly, everything that they kill becomes a joke. So have you heard of the movie that was made with Brad Pitt called A River That Runs Through It?
I'm familiar with that, but I've never seen it. But continue.
So it's based in Missoula, Montana, and Brad Pitt and all of his colleagues in the movie make a joke about, the further you get from Missoula, the more bastards you encounter, and right up above the dam, where they come down through that in somebody else's boat and wreck the boat, you have one of the massive air bases for America. I forget what the name of the air base is, but if you look at Missoula on Google Maps and you track up the river a little bit, you get to the air base that was used to bomb Russia and Germany in World War II. And it's such a well kept secret, and I'm led to believe that the massive Boeing European Airbus wars were hosted in that western side in Washington in Northwest America, and that becomes a series of jokes. You remember the films about Randolph Hearst, and who was the American plane magnate that lived in Washington, and he was a legend. In the movies that were made about him, he was allegedly exiled and locked up in his own home, and I think it was Jane Russell that was his lover at one time, but I forget what the name. He took a lot of reputational hits as being a profiteer in wartime, and I think he's just a sacrificial icon for all of the American profiteering in those campaigns. Yeah, and it's really sad that even the movies that they make, almost everything that Hollywood produces is a joke at false religion or the geopolitical manipulation. And did I mention briefly the authors of the Christian? I think I did, because when I've talked to some of your followers about that, they get ballistic, and because in the chat room you cite biblical text details, some of your followers got very, very outspoken with me about the research I've done on the fake up of the New Testament. Have you heard of the Piso family?
No, I haven't, but let me address a couple things that you bring up. You talked about a big strategic air command base. That's old, they don't call it that anymore, but I think you might be talking about Malmstrom, M-A-L.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, so you've heard of that?
Oh, I've been there. Do you know what I used to do for a living?
You were in the RAF equivalent in America?
Yes, I flew for the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Air Force, and I flew for 16 years. I flew out of Fargo, North Dakota, and there's a song in country music over here. I've been everywhere, but if it's a military airport, I've probably been there. I grew up in a military family, but that's why when you said a huge air base north of Missoula, yeah, Malmstrom and there's an Air National Guard base called Great Falls. It's a civilian airport. That's there also. But
so it's the Great Falls one. You see, that is the irony about that movie, and and I've talked to Dean Henderson, and he's one of the most informed analysts on the globe, and it was quite upsetting for you. Remember when you guys all had the big fallout about what happened in 9/11 and whether it was drones and whether it was planes, and everybody was not talking to each other and sulking. Everybody was hitting on Jeff Rents because he makes a lot of money on the side, but those two, Rents and Henderson, are probably the most insightful fiscal and economic analysts that I've ever heard from in America. And when I was trying to get, still can't get in touch with the Rents. But what happened in Italy when I was trying to do that, because my home is so heavily surveilled, Gmail that I use is run out of Woolwich in London, or it may be Wimbledon, and all of the massive intel operations Gordon Bowden and I have managed to suss out over time. And now in peacetime, the intel people become the launderers. It's tragic. Yeah, and it means that everybody, you know, is in that sovereign debt pool. And if you know anything about accounting, you cannot have a balance sheet where everybody's in debt. And the tragedy is that the global financial institutions that run the world actually steal from all of our democracies. And that is now, you know, the head of the statistics in Britain is a chap called Lord Klaus Moser, and he's 95 years old. He's got dozens and dozens of registered companies that are laundering democracy's funding out of the House of Lords, and there's a Parliamentary Foundation for Democracy that is the equivalent in the House of Commons. And have you heard of Nadim Zahawi?
No, I don't think I have.
So he's a Kurdish guy that came in and was mentored by Tony Blair's spin doctors, and he is now the MP for Stratford-on-Avon, where Shakespeare released all this false news. And he's a war criminal, and he's indicting all of the innocents in the Holy Lands, yeah, for, you know, being the culprits behind what NATO did to them. And it's really, really sick. And that's why we have no money left in our treasury, and the central bank is run by just cheap shot fraudsters. Yeah, there's a company called Cairn, and that's led by a friend of George W. Bush's and the family. Have you heard of Bush Overby?
No, I haven't.
It's
don't feel bad. I mean, I'm not ignorant on every subject. I don't have a background in financial crimes. But I have a question from one of our chatters. Do you know the name Judge Anna von Reitz?
No, I know Condoleezza and her sister and all the, you know, their role in the Foreign Office, and there are several Rices that I know across Europe.
Not Rice, Reitz, R-E-I-T-Z. But anyway, I'll put you in touch with her via email.
Yeah, excellent.
She just wrote a book that you can get it online, and it just came out last month. And in her book, she's a great public servant when it comes to financial crimes. Not you guys over there, not you, but whoever the power brokers are in the City of London. They're not fooling they're fooling the majority of us, but they're not fooling anybody with a brain, because we have proven that the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, which is headquartered in Puerto Rico, which is not even a state.
Is that the Caribbean?
Yeah, it's in the Caribbean, and strangely enough, I used to live there too, on Ramey Air Force Base. But also the Social Security problem in the United States of America, all those proceeds go to the Queen. Did you know that, George? Yeah,
because of Greg Hallett's insight, I'm aware of most of those things.
Okay.
I just wish I could remember the American author that revealed all the land grabs. De La Rouche, was it?
Yeah, LaRouche, last surname L-A-R-O-U-C-H-E.
Yeah, I think that's it. And his insight is massive, and it explains all of the, you know, the taking over of everywhere in sub-Saharan Africa, and that also is the Crown Templar. Yeah, and the training of the people there is done by mercenary army leaders on the borders of the massive countries, and every time the shit hits the fan, they blame the local people as poachers, and all the mercenaries just gun them down. And that is led by people like, have you heard of Tim Spicer?
I think I have heard of Tim Spicer, but I want you to know that I'm not overly interested or educated in financial crimes. I'm aware of them at the highest level. For instance, that the United States is not a sovereign country, it's a colony of you guys. But don't try to educate me, just try to educate our listeners. And I'm trying to find out if, what's his name, LaRouche is the guy that's the land.
It's Lyndon B. LaRouche.
Oh, okay, good. That's what I thought.
Yeah, and it's fascinating stuff, and you know, all of that is in the face of the American history. And I was talking to Jim Fetzer last night, because they're driving me into poverty here, and they've shut down my energy supplies in my house. I'm living on my last £25 of electricity. So this is a very timely interview, and you know, it's really sick. But the banking crimes are the things that will return America to decency and prosperity, and all you need to do is let the truth out about how they have been stolen by private individuals. That's also the Queen and the royal family, but it's mainly the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, and the big five, you know, families that run the banking frauds and all of the things that we've had through. You know, the Rothschilds have still drawn down payments on the Panama Canal.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just amazing. I think that's Evelyn de Rothschild, or one of the really elderly ones, and it's, you know, they've got their mitts into every one of the massive financial institutions. And when people like Mandela come along, yeah, he was trained in Tavistock in Britain, and like most of the people that have been involved in the great conflicts, yes, Stalin was trained in Britain, and that led to a thing called the Sydney Street Siege. Churchill is one of the world owners, and he's allowed to sire the Queen's babies, because it's another issue when we get to Queen Elizabeth. Sorry, to the Queen Mother of Queen Elizabeth. Yeah, so Winston Churchill sires their children, because again, it's an issue of not having enough genuine royal blood. And they changed the laws of succession in 2012 to cover up that illegitimacy for 163 years. And my mate Greg Hallett, I believe he's been topped and replaced by, you know, body doubles. He no longer talks about those massive issues, and the new topic is false religion, but it's quite superficial, and it, you know, the whole of the defrauding of the democracy. So let me tell you about who's on the core of the Bank of England. It's run by a man called Carney from Canada, and that's a scam. If you can get European magnates to come to America, yet to run your financial institutions, that's why Miss Lagarde is at the IMF. And I've been to Washington a couple of times to scientific congresses, and I've seen the massive buildings. You know, the road that runs up to Grand Central Station from the, what's the Arlington burial ground, and then you walk away from there and you're in a massive road that's full of embassies and financial institutions. I forget the name of the road in Washington.
Is it Wisconsin Avenue by any chance?
I maybe, even if you told me, it may not ring the bell, but
I'll find out for you in the chat room right now. I'm just asking our chat room to tell me where the embassies and consulates are. Yeah, I'll have that answer within a minute, I think, from our chat room.
So I was in Washington when Obama was elected in 2008, and the bastard nearly ran me over. Right in front, there's a statue of Pershing, the tank commander, at the White House end of the massive parade, where was it Lincoln that was executed in that street?
I'm not sure. Lincoln was executed, but I find it interesting when you refer to Obama that you call him a bastard, because that's absolutely accurate. He went to my high school, and when he went to my high school, he was named Barry Srikero. He was registered at Punahou High School as an Indonesian Muslim. When he went to college, he had a Fulbright scholarship, which in the United States of America can only be given to foreign students. In 1994, my own sister, Christine Marcy, gave him his U.S. passport, and for the previous portion of his life, he had a CUKC. I think that's Citizens of the United Kingdom and Commonwealth, or something like that.
And who trained him for greatness? I know that Georgetown in America is very influential. And our EU boss, a chap called Barroso, he's been shamed by me and has resigned recently, but he was trained by Henry Kissinger at Georgetown University. And and you've got the Brookings Institute, and all of the world leaders are manipulated in that way, and they're told what to do by the G8 leaders. And it's a tragedy for the free world that none of the innocent countries and the peace-loving countries ever get left alone, and all of their banks now belong to the Rothschilds and those massive financial dynasties, the Tuckers, the Rockefellers, and it's just sick. And intelligent folk like you and me can fix it by just releasing the truth. It's amazing the number of resignations that me and my colleagues have sparked here, and the policy changes are now beginning to happen. Our public sector in Britain has had its pay frozen for 7 years back to back because they pretend all the time that we're in a financial crisis, and that all they need to do is release more money. All they do at the moment is, from the issuance of the banks, from the federal banks and the Bank of England, and even the equivalents in Ireland. Ireland is independent, but they've got banks and mints, and we share the same pound. And it's just a tragedy that only the elites are given the money. And now it's done electronically, and that's called, have you heard of quantitative easing?
Yes, I have. QE.
Just a massive scam to deflate the worth of the sovereign currency, and all of that is now the Eurozone scam, and all of it is led by the elites, and a lot of them are resident in that street in Washington that we just talked about. Lagarde was trained in the Bank Paribas, and her predecessor was Strauss-Kahn, and so he gets accused of rape in hotels, but what they've done is to rape the whole of the innocent world. So when Poland was freed by Wałęsa, they give them such massive loans that it cripples the nascent democracy. Same in South Africa, and that was the Mandela thing. And Chicago, there was an inspirational man in Chicago, I forget what his name is, but he was the one that started the globalism project, and people like Naomi Klein write about that, but she's a false plant. The most inspirational book, when I came out in neuroscience and I began to look for the financial culprits that crashed the banks and created that economic mess that we were in 2008, she was the most influential author that I could find. She proclaimed all the rationale behind the brutalization of Iraq, how all of the companies led by Cheney and all of those bastards in the White House that totally pre-planned it. You understand entirely that the bringing down of the Twin Towers and the Pentagon was to demonize Islam and to take us into those unjustified wars.
Yes, I'm fully aware of that.
And so when you look at what happened when Blackwater and all those companies get into the red zone in Iraq, they just neglect their commitments, and they let the locals build it from the rubble, and it's tragic that can happen. But Naomi Klein, who I admired so much, I'm in touch with her administration. She got a lot of my emails from 2010 up till about 2013, when I realised that she gets her money to author the books in advance from people like George W. And she gets a massive, a couple of million to write the next book. And she now writes as a false socialist on our socialist blog spots in Britain. Do you know what our next project is?
No, tell us.
Global fucking warming, and the whole thing is a scam run by Bill Clinton and his foundation, and all of it, the acts of God that create the global weather patterns, because they invented the whole of our beautiful universe. And what happens when Christianity is launched into the South Pacific, which is called the Pacific because it's a peaceful ocean? Do you know what the Christians took with them when Magellan went in his 3 ships? That's the 3 ships that go sailing by on Christmas Day in the morning. because Jesus was never born. It's the world's biggest secret. Yeah, and when I told that to Jim Fetzer, he gagged and choked, and we could not continue with the interview. And I have all the evidence now, and I've published loads of it already. Yeah, it's a sick joke. But when they went to the South Pacific in Magellan's 3 ships, they took with them El Nino. Do you know what El Nino is in the global warming scale?
Yeah, it's a change in the temperature of the Pacific Ocean, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what they tell you now, and that's what the Clinton Foundation tell you. But it is actually on Magellan's boats. It's a tiny little figurine of the baby Jesus. Look it up on Google Images. Hit El Nino and hit religion, and hit El Nino and hit weather, and you'll see the joke. It's a massive joke, and the whole of the Clinton Foundation is now selling off, you know, all the global education campaigns that Clinton sells. Do you understand the joke and the links to Mark Twain?
I'm familiar with Mark Twain. What's the joke?
So Tom Sawyer,
Yeah.
what colour did they paint the fence?
I don't know.
White. It's the whiteboards joke. Yeah, and that's Bill Clinton and the Aryan master race. Yeah, and I don't know how Obama fits in, but clearly if you can get people all riled up with the fact that you've got not an American citizen as your president, they can get away with murder and mass grand larceny in the back room. And that's just exactly what they do. Yeah, and my friends, we can track some of the financial crimes in places like Toronto, but now that they know that if you publish all your directorates and you proclaim which politicians are on the take, yeah, that it is a very negative policy for the future of the profiteering. So what they did was that they closed the access to the public of all the details in the Toronto Stock Exchange, and that is a huge frustration, because Canada is a massive part of that global cabal. You know how our propaganda minister in World War II and the head of the Daily Express was Beaverbrook from New Brunswick in Canada, and Hitler was trained for the profiteering role in Brunswick in Germany. And all of them think that the ordinary people are too simple to see those jokes. So Churchill did the cull at Gallipoli. Churchill was back in the War Office, yeah, and the Prime Minister through that great conflict. And all of our people in financial services head west into Canada. And you know who the boss was who sequestered the America's gold? That's Mellon. And that's the joke. Are you a fan of the Lord of the Rings movie about the freedom and the tiny little hobbits freeing the tyrannous world? Have you heard of that? The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien?
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I don't have time to waste on audio. But continue.
It's just that every character in that movie, in that story, which was written out at Oxford's richest college, is a tyrannous world leader or a character in world leadership. And the code word to get into the underground in that movie was Mellon. That's the Mellon banks, and Mellon is your head of the treasury when you come big time into the profiteering. And he now runs the Mellon Bank, and the Oxford and Cambridge teams both have them as their sponsor in the boat race. Oxford, Cambridge, Göttingen and Heidelberg were immune from bombing through the whole of World War II, and de Gaulle goes to Buckinghamshire so that he's in the no bombing zone, and they can optimise their profiteering. Did you know that? And the Göttingen and Heidelberg, like Oxford and Cambridge, have produced more German chancellors, that's the Prime Minister or President equivalent, yeah, than any other universities in those countries. And the rocket scientists and the nuclear physicists that did for Japan came from those institutions. All of them are gifted American citizenships, and it's a massive profiteering exercise. And you remember, did you see the footage of the London Olympics when they opened the opening ceremony?
I think I did, but refresh my memory, and I'll be honest and say I didn't. It doesn't sound familiar.
So the man who was playing the organ was playing Chariots of Fire, which is a film that was made by David Putnam about running for your country, and the person being unable to do that because of his Christian convictions on a Sunday. Now, all of the elites who can read and write in Latin and Greek understand that the Christianity fraud is a fraud and that Jesus never existed. Yeah, and that's the joke about the Chariots of Fire movie. And that team, that little man that was Mr. Bean, who is actually the war correspondent for Gallipoli, they make huge jokes about World War One, and World War One was extended by coercing Woodrow Wilson in America. Have you heard about that? Woodrow Wilson was a professor at Princeton. He got involved in a sexual scandal at Princeton, and his sexual partner there was given $40,000 to keep quiet. But the two people that coerced him were the first two Jews on the Supreme Court in America. That's Untermeyer and Brandeis. Yeah, and they then coerced Wilson, who ran on the pacifist ticket that every president does. Same for FDR in World War II. Yeah, but all of them, and the World War II thing, you understand that Pearl Harbor was, all of the profiteers come together. They tell the Japanese emperor, who's still in power in Japan, to come and blow it up, and all of a sudden you've got the whole world divided for profit on both sides of the Atlantic. And the Germans, because they host the conflicts 2 times back to back, pay the biggest price. Yeah, the reparations are horrific, and if you are the host country and all of your great cities like Dresden are flattened, it's a tragedy for your economy for decades to come. And all of that. So the tie-in to the opening ceremony of the London Olympics is that James Bond appeared like the Queen under a parachute, and they flew into the massive stadium that had been built to host it. Yeah, and that is the joke, that Ian Fleming, who's the Bond author, is one of the biggest profiteers and double agents in world history. Did you know that bit?
Yes, I did. And do you know what's being celebrated on Hailing Island on Friday of next week, the 21st of August of 2015?
No, tell me.
Okay. You just talked about Pearl Harbor, which included Lord Mountbatten, and you talked about Ian Fleming. Ian Fleming and Lord Mountbatten were both under the command of Commander Harold Goulding in World War II, and Harold Goulding operated what was called the SBU, Small Boats Unit, out of Hailing Island. His granddaughter, well, let me tell you, first of all, what the British people do to their best people. They kill them because they know too much, and he's a perfect example. He died in Scotland 2 weeks after the war, I think, could be 2 months, it doesn't matter, but the joke turns out to be on the perverts that killed him, because he had left a whole lot of top secret messages in a trunk that was in the attic of his mother's house. And when the mother died, and I think that was in 2010, the daughter of both Harold and Mrs. Gould went up in the attic, because when you have a relative die, some of the other relatives clean the house and prepare it for sale. So she found the attaché case, or the trunk, and she pried open the lock, and she found all these super secret messages from World War II, and finally they murdered him in 1945. Here it is, 70 years later, because a little girl, or a young lady named Jill Goulding, fortunately wanted to find out what was in the trunk. Well, she found out that her grandfather was what some people would call a superhero. He was much bigger than Ian Fleming. He was much bigger than Lord Mountbatten. And as far as the James Bond Ian Fleming fiction, Harold Goulding was a fact, and he actually commanded the small boat unit during a military operation called Operation James Bond. So Ian Fleming probably isn't as bright as some people think he is. So yes, I'm aware of some of those things. Go ahead, over to you.
Operation Winnie the Pooh, you know, all of the cartoon characters. Have you heard of Winnie the Pooh, the cartoon character?
Yeah, sure. Everyone has.
So all of those characters in that cast are treasonous double agents, and some of them are the king that made the stammering speech. I forget. So Tigger was Winston Churchill, the rabbits are Hitler's friends, and all of it, you know, there's several admirals, and you've got a man called Desmond Morton, and he becomes Uncle Desmond Morton, and that becomes everything that they do in wartime or the frauds in peacetime. They cover it up with an obfuscation tool in popular culture. So you're talking about Goulding, that will be Ellie Goulding. She'll have been launched since you reported it, and that's exactly how it works. So all of the Operation Winnie the Pooh involving the Beatles' Yellow Submarine, yeah, and the taking out of Hitler and getting him and Eva Braun in her little blue dress into Spain, where he became a gardener in the Montserrat Abbey. Yeah, and eventually Winston Churchill had to have him murdered because the news was out that he was appearing in town. And in Barcelona too, you have massive, everywhere where you have the major zoos, they have animals and creatures that are jokes about the ownership of the world. You know, the Warner Brothers, all of the things, the Warner Brothers came from a town in Poland that was within 100 kilometers of Treblinka, and that was where the first genocide occurred. It's a place called Krasnosielsk in Poland, yeah, and that's where the Warner Brothers were shipped out. And as soon as they were shipped out, the first genocide occurred in the Holocaust in that place, so that they could become the propagandists in America, and that none of the local Jews could say that that was their next door neighbours. I don't know why they were picked, but it's in the King's Speech movie that won the Oscar. You've got the emphasis on the wah, yeah, and the Warner Brothers launched the whole of the menagerie of ducks and cats, and all of it is a joke about world leaders and Mussolini and things like that, and it's really, really sick. But they still do that today. Yeah, have you heard of it, the man called Cato? Yeah, and all of the characters that are launched into popular culture or music, when you find them, you find that almost all of them interlock with the Rothschilds' boardrooms. Yeah, and so everybody in popular culture is a cover for the financial crimes of the people that run all wars, all sides. And it is a tragedy that that is how democracy's funds are now spent, covering up the sins of our grandparents and the massive profiteering exercises. Now that everybody can read and write and speak to our continental neighbours, you know, thousands of miles from home, like we're doing now, all that needs to happen is that the truth is revealed. And are you aware, you're an expert on 9/11, and do you understand the Tyndall Air Base? It was you that taught me about the Tyndall Air Base, but do you understand that Mike Tyndall is Princess Anne's son-in-law?
No, I was not aware, but...
Yeah, that's how they work it. Yeah, as soon as they plan 9/11, Mike Tyndall played in the rugby team that won the World Cup in Australasia, yeah, in I can't remember, it would be 8 years ago now, or maybe 12 years ago now, and he was picked because of the linkage to Tyndall Air Base, which was, is it in the Miami region?
No, it's not. It's in the western Florida Panhandle. It's not far from Panama City, and it is the home of the first Air Force, I think is what's headquartered there. Basically, Tyndall Air Force Base is where the air defense assets are trained, and I flew in and out of Tyndall for 16 years because when you're in the air defense business in the Air Force in the United States, you have to qualify firing whatever weapon it is you fire once a year. And so I've actually I shot down a drone at Tyndall in 1982, and there's more to that story that's sort of interesting, but we don't have time for it now. But if I'm over in England and somebody in England wants to hear the interesting thing about 1982, remind me. But also I know you have a sense of humor, and somebody in the chat room just said you're a God-fearing man, which is a plus. And if you do have and I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about anyone. If anyone both is in fear of God, which does not mean that you're afraid of him, means you're in awe of him. If for those people who both have a sense of humor and a respectful fear of God, I don't think there is anything in the world that 2 or 3, 4, very small number of people can change us and bring peace. And I want you to know what I'm doing as a private individual. When the Beatles had the song, actually it was John Lennon as a solo, Mind Games, I didn't like that song. But you know, it's sort of funny. What I didn't like in 1980, I've been doing full time for the last 8.5 years, because very late in their careers, people like my evil sister, Christine Marcy, and Barack Obama find themselves in fear of me. I'm not in fear of them. And they're misplacing their fear. They should not be afraid of me. They should be afraid of their own history. And I believe in my lifetime I will see both of them predecease me. I think one of them is going to predecease because he or she appears to be responsible for leaking a whole lot of information. But the other one, I believe, will be taken out because the assignments given to that person have not been accomplished. And it will be my great delight to see the morning of September 11 this year, because today and tomorrow I will be crafting a letter, and I don't know who's in our chat room. Let me check. I'm looking for a specific person, and it's in Gloria, and she is not here. But I'm going to ask a lady who's quite businesslike to help me craft a very short letter. George, I'm going to ask you a question, and I'd like a yes or no answer, and then I'll turn it back over to you once I finish this. But are you familiar with the term misprision of treason?
Nope.
Okay, what does that mean?
I missed your, how do you spell it?
Misprision, M-I-S-P-R-I-S-I-O-N. So basically, and I'll get you this via email.
It's got the word piezo in it. Yeah, it's amazing how it appears all over the place. The Pistorius trial, the Life of Pi, and it's just when you understand how it gets interdigitated into the world news and the false news and all the cover-ups for what they did 2,000 plus years ago, it's just amazing. But it's still one of the main drivers for all of the global media's outlets. And where were you bringing the drones down in '82 or what?
Yeah, in 1982 I shot down a PQM-102 at Tyndall Air Force Base, the place where you shoot the drones or shoot at the drones. And just because we have different backgrounds, I'm not making this simple for you, George. It's incumbent on all of us to understand A drone is, these are full-scale drones that are obsolete fighter-type aircraft. And what they do is they take about an $800,000 guidance system and put it in places where the pilot used to be. It's not physically located in the cockpit, but it runs the airplane. And because $800,000 is a lot of money from our standpoint, they don't want the drones being hit and taken down very often. So the people like me that go out with missiles and fire at the drones, so we can practice, I'm speaking a long time ago, we could practice and maintain our proficiency in hitting drones and knocking them out of the sky. That's what their defenders do. The missiles have good guidance system, but they have no warhead. And so generally you would miss the drone, but if you got lucky, and I used to get lucky, and you hit the drone, not because you're skillful, but you have some balance of skill and blessing. If you're blessed with a superior guidance system on your missile, the missile itself is going to guide itself to a collision. And in 1986, I hope you have a sense of humor because you're going to laugh at this. In 1986, I was flying an old beat-up F4. Strangely enough, it's the only one left from our unit that's in flying condition. And I think that's an act of God that lets that go there. I was flying an F4, and there were 4 flights, but among the 4 flights, there were 5 profiles. And on the very first flight, all the competitors would face the same type of targets. And what you would do, and I'm talking to the camera now so people will see it, you do a frontal attack on a full-scale drone, and you fire your weapon, which is a radar missile, and then when the radar missile doesn't knock it down, then you re-engage it and do that fighter pilot stuff, and then you attack it with a heat-seeking missile. Well, on this day in history, when it was my turn to fire, the guy I was working with was hard of hearing, and I'm a notorious, loose cannon. And so when it's time to fire, not only is the guy in the back not really doing a very good job, the controllers who are controlling us for safety purposes, they did a horrible job. They never cleared me to fire. And so when the guy in the back wasn't taking care of business, I saw that I was about ready to run out of the launch envelope, so I fired a missile without clearance. And that's my job, is to kill things, not to have patty cake taffy pulls. So anyway, then I started the reattack, and you have to make.
So where was the drone headed, and who was going to be the victim?
The drone was just operating it's not the type of drone you're thinking of. It's a full-scale fighter aircraft that is remotely controlled.
Ah.
So yeah, so over there in England, we used to have Harriers, they're all gone. We used to have Phantoms, they're all gone. But when they go away, they get turned into drones. And so this was just a training evolution in protected airspace where there's nobody on the surface of the water, because when the airplanes come down occasionally, you don't want to hurt people. But after I fired the first missile without a clearance, I said Fox 1 reattack, which means I fired a radar missile and I'm reattacking. And then you can hear this pregnant pause as everybody involved in the operation goes, "What just happened?" And they sat there with their thumbs in their asses so long that I got a good shot in the stern of this F-100. And so I said, Fox 2, and I haven't been cleared for the first one yet, and I wasn't cleared for the second one, but I have some personality flaws. And one of them is, if I'm training to defend the United States of America, I'm going to defend the United States of America, and I'll let the candy asses sort it out when I get safely on the ground. So sorry to take up your time. Your question was, am I aware of Tyndall? Yes, not only am I aware of Tyndall, but I have a very rich history there. It's quite well documented. Over to you, George.
And do you understand the drones, Joe? Because I understand it. I'm not sure whether it's an American company, but I get the news from the Carnegie Foundation and it advertises drones, and the leading drone supplier now is Detweiler McDonald. Do you understand that joke?
Tell me the joke, but it's actually McDonald. It's MDA, McDonald, Detweiler and Associates. They did 9/11, but keep going.
So those, I'm not in the military, but those names mean McDonald the restaurant, and they are the sponsors for the Time Team. that make the jokes about Mr. Bean and World War One and the cull of 80 million people. Yeah, but the joke, have you heard of a movie called The Sound of Music? It's one of the most famous movies that was ever made. Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote the music.
The hills are alive with
That, good lad, you've got it. So, the man who was the coordinator for the Von Trapp family singers is Detweiler. Yeah,
Okay.
and all of it. When they escaped from Austria into Switzerland, yeah, they went across the Alps, and that's right next to the route to Hitler's nest in Bavaria. Do you know what the number for the auto route to Hitler's nest was?
No, I do not.
999. The call out number for the cops, for the British Commonwealth, all around the world for all that time. And it's ever so funny for you if you're a profiteer and you understand all of that. And Hitler was born in Innsbruck, yeah, in the Innsbruck region, and that is the no room at the inn in the baby Jesus jokes. And all of it. The reason I'm God-fearing is that when the Piso family wrote the Bible, they wrote it in Naples, in Italy.
Okay, your volume just went down. You wiggled something. We had a little static, and then you became quieter.
Yeah, this is a touchy subject. So when the Pisos wrote the Bible, they were living in Naples. Yeah, and when they released the main chunks of the Bible in 79 AD, guess what happened next?
I do not know.
Vesuvius, right next to their home, erupted on their home, which was called the Villa Papyri. Do you get it? Yeah, everything. When you look at the quakes and the volcanoes and the actions that occur there, and you look at what was happening in that region at that time in human history, you can suss it. Yeah, it's just, that's why I'm God-fearing. And everybody that stands in my way now as profiteers in healthcare, or deserters in the in Britain, we've had a student loans crisis imposed upon us in the last 15 years. In 1995, everybody in our country got their honours degree totally free, even at Oxford and Cambridge and those elite institutions. Now it's £60,000 per annum, yeah, for the 4 years honours degree that me, Lord Patten at Oxford, and the Prime Minister got for nothing. It's a tragedy, and all of that has happened in one generation.
Okay.
Now that every family is cast into debt because of that, and the other scams that they run are in the energy sector. Yeah, and I've exposed that with a person called Gordon Bowden. Have you heard of Gazprom?
Spell it for me, please.
Gazprom. It's run by Gerhard Schroeder, who's one of those two universities, either Göttingen or Heidelberg. Yeah, the Grimm brothers came from Göttingen. They were in an organisation called the Göttingen 7, hugely influential in the lead up to World War One. And the man Chamberlain, who was the British Prime Minister, was actually also an Aryan myths author. He got the Iron Cross in Germany from Bismarck in the lead up to World War One, and that's the demonisation of everything that sparks the wars, and all the false news is still designed to do that. And when I referred you remember you guys came to Nottingham?
Yeah.
There's a joke about Nottingham and world history that links you into David Putnam, who was my boss at Sunderland University and is a very famous movie maker. He made the Chariots of Fire joke about the Christianity fraud. Yeah, and the Putnam Monthly is a published output, and I think it's from 2 or 3 of the leading warmongering universities in America. I think it's Yale, is one of them. I can't. It may have been Harvard, and I think Princeton is the other one. And Georgetown has a really bad reputation. Yeah, but if you look up Putnam's, it's either Putnam's Monthly or Putnam's Weekly. Yeah, and the joke about Nottingham and not. Have you seen the Notting Hill movie?
No, I have not.
Everybody that is. Have you heard of the Leveson inquiry?
No, I have not heard that.
Okay, so you understand that Rupert Murdoch runs the global media cabal, and Rupert Murdoch was brought in by the CIA out of Australia and was funded by the busted Nugan Bank. Gough Whitlam was his sponsor in Australia, and I think it was President Ford in America. And all of a sudden he transits through Britain and he wrecks our free press. He is now the father of a woman called Elizabeth Murdoch, who drinks in a thing called the Chipping Norton set, which is like a secret society in the Prime Minister's constituency. And they've got leading media figures. Have you heard of Jeremy Clarkson? He's a racing man, you know, a fast cars man.
Yes, I've heard of that name.
And he plays the same role as the Marx Brothers did way back when, yeah, just to cover up the false news with jocular comments. Yeah, and all, you know, the song that they sang about Lydia and the tattoos, every stanza in that song is a joke about world history. Yeah, crossing the Delaware and everything that happens and the stealing of the central banks, it's all mentioned in that song. And the equivalent for that today in Britain is a chap called Ali G. Have you heard of him?
I don't think so, but spell it for me.
So A-L-I and then G. Yeah, just the letter G.
I've never heard of him, but I was interviewed on a radio TV show once by Alex G. And but anyway.
No, he's genuine. But Ali G, his real name is Baron Cohen. Yeah, do you understand the significance of Baron Cohen?
Sounds like a Jewish guy that's trying to present.
Yeah, they're the high priests of Israel.
Okay.
Yeah, and what they do is that they marry into the Rothschild family. Yeah, and that is the mass. You know, so you've got Aaron in the Christian Bible, and he is obliged to keep the bloodline pure to marry his own sister, and that is the Cohens. And they come all the way through to the people that marry into the Rothschilds in London. and Ali G thinks he's really, really funny. Everything they do is really superficial, and we've got sports stars that play the same roles. David Beckham, for example, and all of them we've busted open as massive financial fraudsters. Because have you heard of Michael Grade?
No, I did not.
Head of the BBC and the ITV, the independent TV movements. He runs the biggest Ponzi empire of false companies in the false news sector I've ever seen. Yeah, and they run into Tel Aviv and all across Europe. And all of the celebrities and football stars that are the England soccer captains, TV chefs, all of the celebrities on the telly, all of the comedians are locked into their boardrooms, and they're massive, and it tells all the lies that we see on the front pages of the papers all of the time. You must get a lot of that because you're very revealing in your research. It must be quite frustrating for you when you reveal the truth about something, yeah, that you see the fault. So Ellie Goulding will be the false news person for, have you heard of her? She's a lovely blonde singer, yeah, and she's launched, and that will be at the same time as the cover up for what you discovered about the wartime profiteering and the killing of that man in 1945. But you know, the number of people that I've discovered. So Mr. Bean was the war correspondent for Gallipoli. The serial killer in the NHS, that means that every healthcare professional in Britain now has to do a thing called continuing professional development. It means that they have to retrain to create the right to work every year in the whole of their professional career, and all of it is launched by false news campaigns that keep the people in fear. So the serial killer in the NHS was called Shipman, and he was played, I believe, by the man who died. Who's the one who made the Jumanji film?
Robin Williams.
Yeah, if you look at Shipman and his images, and you look at Robin Williams, I believe that Robin Williams did the dirty and made the false news outlets. And do you know who Shipman really was?
No.
The war correspondent for Iraq. Yeah, it's a replay of the Mr. Bean Gallipoli joke, and that's how they do it. Everything that is the truth, and that's the man, Shipman, who tried to prevent and expose the killing of David Kelly, the decent civil servant who went in Thatcher's trade delegations with Cameron to the Republic of South Africa. And David Kelly was taken out because he knew about nuclear explosions and the testing of devices, and the only thing that man wanted to do was to keep his pension, but they had him killed in the woods, and it is tragic. Yeah, so the obfuscation is massive. So Taylor Swift is brought into the popular culture to cover up SWIFT, the money laundering organisation, one of the biggest. Yeah, and you can go on and on. Have you heard of a singer called Adele?
No, I don't think so. But, are you Scottish?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, your accent, I mean, you're much easier to understand than a lot of people. And I've spent a fair amount of time over in UK, and I've been to Wales and I've been to Ireland, Northern Ireland, not the other Ireland. But you're coming across, and I'm watching people in the chat room be very supportive and amazed at what you're capable of expressing to us. And I think they clearly want more. But no, tell me about this person, and I'll try.
Well, I'd love to come back and do it again, because I've got lots more to share. Yeah, I think what we talked about briefly was, Nixon's biggest crime is electoral fraud. He's a massive, massive, massive genocidal presence all around the Golden Triangle, and his commitments, to Vietnam and the dismemberment of US troops there is massive, and it gets all. Have you heard of Henrik Kruger?
I don't recall. I deal in information all day long from the time I get up till the time I put myself to sleep.
Henrik Kruger's book on the Great Opium Coup has been censored in America since 1980. Yeah,
okay.
You need to read it. It explains the whole of narcotics history. Henry Kissinger plays a huge part in all of those stories, and the running of the narcotics into Latin America, and the replacement of the main laundering hub for the mafias in Europe was a place called Marseille, and the leading chemistry labs were in that place. Yeah, and all of the movies that are launched into. Have you heard of the Grand Prix movie?
Yes.
Yeah, the Grand Prix movie, the beautiful music and the lovely blonde that is in love with the Frenchman who plays the hero that ends up crashing into a tree and dies. His name was Sarti. Sarti is actually one of the lethal killers in the narcotics gangs that took the Golden Triangle basic substance, the opium came from there, and the raw heroin came from the Golden Triangle. So that's Burma, where Mrs. Thatcher's husband runs Burma Oil. Yeah, and you've got, what are the other two countries? You've got Vietnam and I forget what the third one is. But all of them, the American troops are deliberately dismembered by opiate addiction, and then they get HIV in the dens, in the prostitution dens, and all of that is a premeditated gesture led by Nixon. And Kissinger is the world's biggest killer, and he's still in power, and I've got all his director numbers with the Royal Prince, with Murdoch's.
Well, let's get him. Well, why don't we get him?
Well, I believe that he's been kind of retired off. The last time I saw him, I believe it was at Nelson Mandela's funeral, and all of them are in fur coats, and that is the furriest joke about the Piso family in religion. Yeah, because there's a furriest Piso, and all of that. You know, the religious fraud is particularly vicious. And do you know where the biggest church in the world was before they built the Vatican?
No, I do not.
It's a joke about Hollywood, and it's the George Clooney joke. So the Cluny Abbey is in southern France, near Clermont-Ferrand, where the first killing was done in World War I.
Okay.
Yeah, and when it comes, so that's launched by the Piso family, and if you get the word pie, like The Life of Pi or the National Velvet movie that Elizabeth Taylor made all those years ago, it's a joke about the Piso authors. So the name of the Nile was the Pishon. Yeah, they had to change it. Yeah, because the joke gets out over time. And when Christianity came to Scotland, can you guess, with the word pie in it, where the first cathedral was? And it's involved in the Irish sectarian violence for 30 years. Yeah, and all of it takes you back to the pie word. So where was the big abbey or cathedral in Scotland near Glasgow?
I do not know.
Paisley, and that becomes Ian Paisley the Protestant in the Irish Troubles. Yeah, and all of the Irish Troubles are ended with the Chinook crash. That's the Mull of Kintyre crash, sang about by Paul McCartney 10 years before, and when they sunk the Titanic, they wrote a book called Sinking the Titan 10 years before. That's how the New World Order proclaimed their greatness. But now that we've got thinkers like you and me, they dare not do it. But they did it again on 9/11 because they had the little red doll joke with Princess Fergie on the 111th floor. And when you reveal the royals as murderous profiteers, they begin to turn on each other. All of the abdications that we've had in Europe are sparked by my explicit revelation. You did not know about Mike Tyndall being Princess Anne's son-in-law. Princess Anne, as soon as those secrets are revealed, they began to make sideshows about eating horse meat, and she condones that now. And the horse is the icon for the Piso family, because in Greek the word hippos is the word for horse in Greek, and that becomes the jokes about all of the horsey things. And the Governor General is the GG, and the Governor General in all of the Commonwealth and the empire upon which the sun has not yet set, but with you and me on the job, it will set really quickly soon. Yeah, so do you see it? The Governor General that laughs at the killing of the Anzac troops from her jurisdiction in Gallipoli, yeah, that's the Mr. Bean joke. She's the GG, and it's all tied in to the elites who understand that religion and Christianity is a fraud for 2,000 years. Yeah, and that's the launch of Vesuvius onto the Villa Papyri. And everywhere you go, if you are you religious?
No, I'm not religious. I believe in God, and I'm a Christian, and I do that not because somebody taught me, but because God revealed himself to me.
Well, I believe in God, but I don't believe in Christ. And when the Christian story was released by the Pisos, it's called the Pauline Missions. And if you look where St. Paul went, out... Have you heard of Monty Python's and the comedy team?
Yeah, I love them.
If they laugh at it, it's a joke about false religion. So Paul started in Antioch, where you have the Antioch hand grenade joke from the Pythons. He transits through Cyprus and then gets into the Balkans region, yeah, and then they go north, and then all the way across the Med, yeah, through the Crimean region and across the Black Sea region, and then they go across to the toe of Italy, yeah, and that's when they have some of the biggest quakes, that, you know, when that religion is actually being launched through there. And even the Pinocchio film is a joke about religion. So Geppetto, his dad, is the father god, and he ends up in the belly of the mammalian whale, and they've even got the gall to put that in, is it Jonah in the Old Testament?
Yes.
and so Jesus is the boy with no strings, and what you've got is that he grows a tail, yeah, and they've got donkey's ears, and the donkey is the ass on Palm Sunday, and the Pisos think that's hilarious. And do you know what the coins were called that the Piso Frugi family, that were the bosses in Rome 120 years before Jesus was launched as a fake-up? What was the name of the coins?
I don't know.
Asses.
Oh.
Yeah, it's just a relentless joke, and I now understand. The day that my power was shut down was the day that I released my video on those themes. And what you've got on the flip side of the coins is the dragon in the lake joke, which is the St. George and the dragon joke. And in Scotland we've got a thing like the have you heard of the Loch Ness Monster?
Yes.
So we've got an icon called a Kelpie, and it's in a lot of Hollywood films already, and the Kelpie-like creature, the dragon, is on the flip side of the coin, because they keep people in fear perpetually. And when Christianity spread, I've explained how it got to Ireland and how we've got Ian Paisley and the Catholic equivalents. Yeah, the Catholic equivalent, all of them are profiteers. And when Gordon Bowden and I made the videos on that, some of them are advisors to Prime Minister Gordon Brown, and some of them, Paddy Ashdown, have you heard of him?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, and they began to jail people that we were revealing as financial profiteers. And it's tragic that the whole of religion is a forced strife exercise. And if you look at the history of the 30 Years' War in Europe, it's Christian versus Christian all across Europe, and all of the pagans get burnt as witches as that proceeds. And then you've got all the Inquisitions and all the holy wars, 6 holy crusades, yeah, brutalizing other people's country in the name of the one true God. And Jesus' biggest, lesson was that you must love your neighbour. It's the biggest cause of death on our globe. And can you guess, they went west to Paisley, the Cluny Abbey, so that's the George Clooney joke. Yeah, and they went east to Constantinople, and that is the joke about Emperor Constantine, because all the emperors are intertwined with the Bible authors through all of Roman and Naples' history. Yeah, and when they went east to Constantinople, it was Emperor Constantine, around about, I think it was 350 to 400 AD, or maybe not have been as long as that, but he was the one that began to endorse it and make it an official, because before then it had been confined to the catacombs, yeah, and it was an underworld operation. And have you heard of a Mithraeum?
Yes.
So that's like the place where they have the orgies, and all of the plotters are involved in that, and the Mithraea are all over England, even 55 BC, and that is where they planned the whole of the Christianity fraud. And Julius Caesar is the head of the triumvirate, and his initials are the same as an iconic Son of God that you might have heard of before. It is the biggest fraud and the biggest secret in world history, which is, and when I revealed all of that, the poppy joke on Remembrance Sunday, you know how we celebrate in Britain all of our war dead sacrifice? Poppy is the wife of Nero in the Roman court, and that becomes, you know, the poppy fund run by Butcher Haig and run by the Duke of Westminster, Britain's richest man.